When love feels uncertain, the natural instinct is to hold tighter, explain more, chase harder. But emotional clarity often arrives in the opposite direction. Sometimes the most powerful shift happens when you stop forcing connection and start choosing peace. Ironically, that is often what brings someone back, not desperation, but self-respect. When emotional attachment turns into clinging, it quietly changes the entire dynamic of a relationship. Instead of love feeling natural and mutual, it starts to feel heavy, pressured, and emotionally overwhelming. Constant messaging, repeated reassurance seeking, and overthinking every small response can create an invisible tension that the other person begins to feel, even if nothing is directly said. Human psychology naturally pulls away from pressure, not because feelings are necessarily gone, but because space is needed to breathe. The more someone feels emotionally cornered, the more their instinct is to create distance as a form of relief rather than rejection. Clinging behavior often comes from fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of being replaced, or fear of not being enough. But ironically, that fear projects itself in ways that can slowly push the other person away. When every silence feels like a problem and every delay feels like abandonment, emotional imbalance begins to form. Instead of building attraction, it builds anxiety on both sides. One person feels they are constantly being watched or needed too intensely, while the other feels increasingly insecure because their worth is tied to constant validation. Healthy connection requires emotional breathing space. When you step back from excessive emotional pursuit, you allow the connection to reset itself naturally. It gives both individuals room to reflect without pressure, to miss without obligation, and to feel without interference. Attraction often thrives in moments where presence is not forced but chosen. By releasing the need to constantly hold on, you shift the dynamic from dependence to calm self-assurance. That shift alone can completely change how the relationship energy flows, creating a healthier emotional environment where genuine feelings have space to reemerge without pressure or expectation. When a person stops chasing validation from someone else, something important begins to change internally. Instead of waiting for messages, overanalyzing replies, or measuring self-worth through another person's attention, the focus slowly returns inward. This shift is not about pretending not to care, but about no longer allowing someone else's behavior to define emotional stability. The moment you detach from that constant need for reassurance, you begin rebuilding your sense of identity that may have been slowly fading in emotional dependency. Self-value is not created by being chosen. It is reinforced by how you treat yourself when you are not being chosen. When you start prioritizing your own time, goals, and emotional balance, your energy naturally becomes more grounded. There is a noticeable difference between someone who is emotionally dependent and someone who is emotionally centered. One seeks approval, while the other carries quiet confidence that does not demand attention but still commands respect. This internal shift also changes how others perceive you. People are naturally drawn to individuals who do not appear emotionally desperate or uncertain about their worth. When you stop over-explaining your presence in someone's life, your absence begins to carry more weight. It creates curiosity, reflection, and sometimes even admiration because stability is rare in emotionally intense situations. Rebuilding inner value also means learning to sit with discomfort without reacting impulsively. Instead of sending another message to ease anxiety or trying to fix silence with words, you learn to let moments pass without losing yourself in them. That emotional control becomes a quiet form of strength that slowly reshapes your entire presence and interactions. When someone is constantly available, constantly replying, and constantly trying to stay present in another person's life, the emotional space between both individuals starts to disappear. Without space, there is little room for thought, reflection, or emotional processing. Everything becomes routine, predictable, and mentally crowded. But when you step back peacefully, something subtle but powerful happens. The absence begins to speak in ways constant presence never could. Silence creates awareness. In your absence, the mind naturally starts filling in the gaps. Moments are replayed, conversations are remembered, and emotional impressions begin to surface more clearly. What was once taken for granted can suddenly feel different when it is no longer immediately accessible. This is not about playing games or manipulating emotions, but about allowing natural human reflection to take place without interference, when there is no pressure to respond, no expectation to maintain constant communication, and no emotional urgency being applied. The other person is left alone with their own thoughts. That is where realization often begins. They start noticing your role in their emotional comfort, your presence in their daily rhythm, and the space you occupy without them fully appreciating it in real time does not erase connection, it reveals its true depth. Some feelings only become visible when they are no longer being actively fed by constant interaction. In that quiet gap, clarity begins to form, and emotional understanding becomes more honest because it is no longer influenced by pressure or routine presence. Even when words are carefully chosen and intentions are genuine, what people actually respond to most is emotional energy. It is not just about what is said, but the emotional state behind it that shapes how it is received. You can tell someone you are fine, you can say you understand, or you can try to explain your feelings clearly. But if your energy is filled with anxiety, fear, or emotional urgency, that will still be felt on a deeper level. Energy communicates constantly, even in silence. When someone is attached from a place of fear or insecurity, their actions tend to reflect urgency, frequent checking, overthinking responses, or trying too hard to maintain connection. This creates an emotional signal that feels heavy on the other side. People may not always consciously identify it, but they feel the imbalance. And that feeling can affect how they respond and how close they are willing to stay. When your emotional energy shifts from chasing to calm acceptance, everything changes without needing dramatic action. You stop trying to force outcomes or control responses, and instead you start carrying a more grounded presence. That calmness is noticeable because it does not demand anything from the other person. It simply exists without pressure, expectation, or emotional weight being pushed outward. This kind of energy creates safety. Instead of feeling pulled or pressured, the other person feels more relaxed in your presence. And in relationships, emotional safety is often what allows genuine connection to return naturally. When there is no pressure attached to your words or actions, they become easier to receive, easier to reflect on, and easier to miss when they are not there. When emotional pressure enters a connection, it slowly changes how the other person experiences it. What once felt light and natural can begin to feel demanding, even if the intentions are rooted in love or care. Pressure does not always come from direct requests or arguments. It often shows up in subtle ways like repeated checking, emotional urgency, or the need for constant reassurance. Over time, this creates an internal sense of responsibility in the other person that can feel overwhelming rather than comforting. When someone feels emotionally pressured, their instinct is often to step back in order to regain balance. It is not always about losing feelings, but about trying to escape the weight of expectation. No one naturally thrives in an environment where they feel they are constantly required to respond, prove, or maintain a certain level of emotional consistency. Even strong connections can weaken when they begin to feel like obligations instead of choices. Letting go peacefully removes that invisible pressure. It replaces emotional demand with emotional space. Instead of being pulled into expectations, the other person is allowed to exist without feeling monitored or evaluated. This creates a softer emotional environment where thoughts can settle and feelings can be processed without urgency. In that kind of space, defensiveness often decreases. Conversations feel lighter, memories are processed without tension, and emotional resistance slowly begins to soften. When pressure is gone, clarity has a chance to return. And sometimes it is only in the absence of pressure that someone can truly recognize what the connection feels like without emotional weight attached to it. When you finally stop trying to control whether someone stays or returns, something significant shifts in your emotional reality. The focus is no longer on forcing outcomes, decoding mixed signals, or trying to say the perfect thing that will change their mind. Instead, your attention returns to your own life, your own stability, and your own peace of mind. That shift alone changes the entire dynamic because you are no longer emotionally chasing something that cannot be controlled. If someone comes back after this shift, it rarely feels like the result of persuasion or effort. It feels like they noticed the difference in your absence and emotional energy. Without pressure, without constant availability, and without emotional chasing, they are left with a clearer view of what your presence actually meant in their life. Sometimes people only understand value when the emotional noise is gone and they are left with silence to reflect in. But the deeper truth is that letting go is not a strategy to get someone back. It is a return to emotional self-respect. Whether they return or not becomes secondary. What matters more is that you are no longer living in a constant state of waiting, anxiety, or emotional dependency. That space you reclaim becomes your own again, and it starts to rebuild your sense of direction and identity. If they do not return, the lesson remains just as powerful. You learn that peace is not something you negotiate with someone else. It is something you choose for yourself regardless of their presence. And in that choice, you stop abandoning your own emotional well-being for uncertainty. Letting go peacefully is what pulls him back. It's not about manipulation. It's about emotional alignment. You don't lose love by stepping back. You lose exhaustion. And sometimes that calm distance becomes the very reason someone realizes your value. If you want, I can turn this into a YouTube script, Instagram carousel, or blog post optimized for Google ranking.